The Cook. A historical fiction of love, identity and fate by S.J. Jepsen. Chapter 18. Bound for Home. April 14th, 1912, 8:30 p.m. Lydia Weatherby was no more. Draped in Kate's simple black stewardess uniform, her fine silk gowns and sparkling jewels had been replaced with stiff cotton fabric, a crisp white apron, and a modest cap pinned to her chestnut curls. Gone were the delicate pearl earrings, the weight of wealth and expectation, the identity of the heiress who had once ruled every room she entered. The only piece of jewellery she kept was the gold locket, its delicate hinges safeguarding the portraits of her parents. A solemn promise bound her to it. She would carry it with her always. She was no longer the woman men sought as a prize, nor the daughter expected to marry well. She was simply another nameless stewardess, invisible in a world that had never truly seen her before. The crew dining hall was a far cry from the grandeur of first class. No crystal chandeliers, no gleaming silver, no bone china plates. Just wooden tables lined with tired men and women, bent over simple meals, their voices low, their laughter raw and unpolished. She took her seat among them, her hands curling around a tin cup filled with weak, oversteeped tea, the scent of bitter leaves and metal rising to her nose. Before her sat a steaming bowl of meat and potato stew, thick, hearty, a world apart from the delicate consommés and filets mignons of first class. A slab of dense brown bread, rough and unevenly sliced, sat beside it. She lifted a spoonful of stew to her lips. The flavour was earthy, rich, a blend of slow-simmered beef, root vegetables, and simple spices. It was food meant to sustain, not to impress. And yet, it tasted more real than anything she had ever eaten. Around her, no one looked twice. No one whispered about her name, her family, her fortune. To them, she was just another girl. And for the first time in her life, Lydia Weatherby was free. April 14th, 1912, 9:15 p.m. Lydia's heart thundered against her ribs as she wound her way through the narrow corridors, the air thick with the scent of oil, seawater, and warm bread. The borrowed uniform scratched against her skin. A stark contrast to the silk and lace she was used to, but she hardly noticed, because she was about to see him. The kitchen was alive with the clatter of pots, the murmur of voices, the rhythmic slice of knives against wooden boards. Steam curled in the air, carrying the rich aroma of butter and roasting meat. And there, amid it all, stood Gideon. He was focused, moving with practiced ease as he wiped down a counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, flour dusting his forearms. Lydia stepped forward and simply waited. At first he didn't notice her. Then, as if sensing something, someone, out of place, his head lifted. His gaze landed on her. For the briefest moment, his hands stilled. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Shock, relief, something dangerously close to hope. But he schooled his expression almost instantly, careful not to let the other cooks catch on. Without a word, he closed the space between them, brushing his fingers lightly against her wrist. A silent request. But before he could speak, she turned the gesture back on him.
"Follow me,"
Lydia murmured, her voice quiet but firm. His dark eyes searched hers for a beat, uncertainty flickering there, but then, without hesitation, he obeyed. She led him swiftly out of the kitchen, past the clang of dishware and the din of voices, weaving through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship. He fell into step beside her, his gaze darting between her determined stride and the unfamiliar path she was taking.
"Where are we going?"
he finally asked, his voice low. She glanced at him over her shoulder, her lips curving into the barest hint of a smirk.
somewhere we won't be overheard,
she said quietly. Gideon didn't question her further. They ascended another staircase, leaving behind the steam-filled heat of the kitchens and the hum of the third-class corridors. When they reached the quieter passage leading to the second-class cabins, Lydia finally slowed, her heart thudding with something unnameable. Stopping outside a modest door, she reached for the handle, glancing at him briefly before stepping inside. Gideon followed, his tall frame filling the small space as the door clicked shut behind them. The moment they were alone, the tension between them shifted, breaking like a wave against the shore. His gaze swept over her once more, taking in the way she stood there, unflinching, her breath slightly uneven, her eyes gleaming with quiet determination. And for the first time since the night they met, Gideon truly understood. Lydia Weatherby had never been just another spoiled first-class girl. His dark eyes swept over her once more, taking in the uniform, the quiet determination in her stance.
Lydia,
He spoke in a near whisper.
what are we doing here?
His voice was uncertain, edged with something unreadable. Lydia swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Had he changed his mind? Was it too late?
I want to stay with you.
She whispered, lifting her gaze to his. Her voice trembled, but not with fear.
In New York, I want to leave everything behind.
The words left her lips in a whisper, but they landed like a storm. Gideon didn't speak, didn't move. For a long moment, he simply stared at her as if trying to make sense of what she'd just said, as if he didn't quite believe it. Then, slowly, something in him cracked. His chest rose with an unsteady breath, and before she could say anything more, he pulled her against him, wrapping her in his arms. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't passion or fire or any of the things they had stolen in quiet moments before. It was relief. It was home. Lydia exhaled against his shoulder, her hands gripping his shirt, anchoring herself to the solidity of him. After a long moment, Gideon pulled back just enough, his hand moving to his shirt collar. He reached beneath the fabric, fingers brushing against warm metal, and pulled the chain free. It slid over his head with a quiet rasp of silver links, the medals and tags swaying slightly as they settled into his palm. Hanging from the chain were his Legionnaire identification tags, the medal bearing the grenade insignia of the French Foreign Legion, and his St. Christopher medallion, tokens of a life that had shaped him, guided him, tested him. For a moment he held them in his fingers, feeling their familiar weight. Then he looked at Lydia, his dark eyes steady, something quiet but certain in his expression.
These mean the world to me,
He murmured.
and so do you.
His voice was warm, sure, leaving no room for doubt.
I promise I will take care of you.
Lydia's breath hitched. He wasn't offering wealth or status or security. He was offering himself, his past, his devotion, everything he was and everything he had left to give. The chain slid down over her head, cool metal brushing her skin like a whisper. Lydia sucked in a sharp breath as it settled against her collarbone, heavier than she expected. Not in weight exactly, but in meaning. It was a strange kind of gravity, something ancient and lived in, pressing gently against her sternum, as though the life he had carried in it was now being passed to her. The tags clinked softly, a quiet music only she could hear. She glanced down. The thin silver discs glinted under the dim cabin light, their surfaces worn smooth in places from years of being touched, rubbed, gripped during moments of fear or faith. Her fingers lifted, tentative. She pressed them to the St. Christopher medallion, tracing its ridged edges with the soft pad of her thumb. The etched figure of the patron saint, tiny, nearly faded, stood in silent vigil. And for a long moment, Lydia didn't speak. The room seemed to hush around her, as if the metal had drawn in every breath of air, every heartbeat, every unspoken promise. She looked up at him, eyes wide, her voice low.
Do you miss it?
she asked.
The life you had before?
Gideon didn't answer right away. He reached for her hand, wrapping it gently in his own, letting the chain dangle between them like a bridge.
Sometimes,
He said.
but I wouldn't trade this moment for any of it.
Lydia closed her fingers around the medallion, the saint's face pressed to her palm. Not as a prayer, but as a vow. Her voice was barely a whisper.
Then we won't trade it for anything.
She looked up at him, steady now.
Not ever.
Gideon exhaled, his gaze dark and steady, his hands still resting at her waist. Then, at last, he kissed her. Not a kiss of polite affection, not a kiss of courtship or expectation, but a kiss of certainty, of fire, of everything they weren't supposed to have. Lydia melted into him, her hands tightening in his shirt, his arms wrapping around her as if he could hold her there forever. The world outside the cabin, the grand dining salons, the chandeliers, the conversations about marriages and expectations, ceased to exist. There was only this. Only him. Only them. April 14th, 1912, 10 p.m. Kate exhaled slowly as she closed the door to Lydia's suite, her body sinking into the plush velvet of the chaise lounge. The room was warm, bathed in the golden glow of the electric lamps, their soft, flickering light casting long shadows against the intricately patterned wallpaper. She stood then and walked silently to the elegant vanity, running her fingers over the polished wood, where the small framed photograph of her parents rested. A quiet reminder of who she was beneath the pearls, the silks, the practiced elegance. She exhaled slowly, her fingers lifting to the heavy necklace around her throat. The pearls felt cold against her skin, heavier than they had during dinner, as if they somehow knew they did not belong to her. Carefully, she unclasped the delicate chain, placing it on the vanity where Lydia's perfumes and cosmetics were scattered. Then, with a familiarity born of comfort rather than extravagance, she picked up her own necklace, the one she had carried across the Atlantic. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the simple worn chain around her neck, the familiar weight of the locket settling against her collarbone. It was not elegant or expensive, not adorned with diamonds or pearls, but it was hers, and as she smoothed her fingertips over the tiny engraved words inside.
For my dearest Nanny, my heart, my home, my forever.
Her throat tightened, but for the first time that evening she felt like herself again. Kate turned toward the vanity, catching her own reflection in the gilded mirror. Though she was still wrapped in Lydia's gold and ivory gown, the polished debutante, the woman swathed in silk and candlelight, pretending to be someone she was not, was gone. In her place stood Kate Cook, a baker's daughter, a girl who had spent her life kneading dough and dusting flour from her apron, a girl who had never truly belonged in this world of white-gloved servants and whispered proprieties. Her gaze dropped back to the locket, her thumb brushing over its smooth surface. She had borrowed Lydia's jewels tonight, but this was hers to keep. With a soft sigh, Kate turned away from the mirror, reaching to unpin her hair. The night was quiet, the ship still steady beneath her feet. She turned on the gramophone, letting the soft strains of a delicate waltz drift through the suite. The music filled the space around her, weaving into the air like a lullaby from another life. The soft crackle of the gramophone blended with the lingering warmth of the evening. A night of fine crystal, candlelit conversations, and a meal more exquisite than anything she had ever known. She curled up on the grand four-poster bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the evening's indulgence. In her hands rested a book pulled from Lydia's collection, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, a world of drawing rooms and whispered scandals, of love and pretense. How fitting. The once pristine copy was now well worn, the edges softened from years of turning pages, of rereading familiar words. It had been a gift from Prudy, sent to Lydia on her 16th birthday. The same year, Prudy had learned of the Weatherbys' plans to arrange her marriage to Thomas Hollingsworth.
I want you to read this
Prudy had written in the accompanying letter.
and never forget that your heart belongs to you.
Kate traced her fingers over the faded gold lettering on the spine, smiling faintly. Even now, Lydia carried the lessons Prudy had instilled in her, lessons of courage, of choosing one's own path. Her mind drifted, hovering somewhere between exhaustion and something far heavier. Tonight had been a triumph. She had played the part flawlessly. And yet, as her grip loosened on the book and the words blurred into dreams, she wasn't certain if the warmth in her chest was victory or something dangerously close to regret. For the foreseeable future, she would have to maintain this deception, at least until Lydia and Gideon had safely escaped. And in that moment, she couldn't tell whether the thrill coursing through her veins was exhilaration or fear. Outside, beyond the warmth of the grand suites, beyond the glittering chandeliers and laughter-filled lounges, the North Atlantic stretched on, dark, endless, waiting. As Kate drifted off to sleep, the party in the crew quarters was in full swing, the cramped space alive with laughter, the rhythmic stomp of boots against the floorboards, keeping time with the music of a lively fiddle. Voices rose in drunken camaraderie, the air thick with the scent of ale and tobacco. Lydia and Gideon sat close at one of the worn wooden tables, their fingers entwined before them discreetly. It was done. The decision had been made, whispered between breaths in the quiet sanctuary of Kate's cabin. She had told him, without hesitation, that she wanted to stay, that she would leave behind the silks, the expectations, the life that had never truly belonged to her. And now here they were, the weight of that choice slipping away for just one night, drowned in music, laughter, and the simple unspoken joy of being together. Gideon leaned in, his voice low, rough with something softer beneath, something certain.
Me ma's gonna love you.
He murmured against her ear, his breath warm, his accent curling around the words like something familiar and safe. Lydia's lips quirked, amused and touched all at once.
You think so?
I know so.
He said, squeezing her hand.
She always wanted another daughter, said the boys were too much trouble.
He smirked.
You'll be her favourite before I even get through the door.
Lydia laughed. The sound, light, real. She could picture it, stepping into his world, meeting his family, walking streets that belonged to her only in the sense that she had chosen them. And she had. The reality of it pressed at the edges of her mind, but not yet. Not tonight. Tonight was for dancing. Lydia pushed back from the table, tugging at Gideon's hand.
Come on,
She said, eyes bright with the thrill of it all.
dance with me.
Gideon huffed a quiet laugh but didn't protest as she pulled him to his feet. A first-class lady and an immigrant's son. A girl raised in privilege and a man who had fought for everything he had. Tonight they were simply a maid and a cook, lost in the music, wrapped in the warmth of something fleeting, something reckless, something theirs. Tomorrow everything might change. But tonight, they danced. Next time, in The Cook.